Okay, welcome everybody. We are going to discuss the class today about Passover, the forgotten festival, and I proposed in that teaching, as many of you probably heard and saw, that despite the fact that this is so central to the biblical message, that the authors of the Bible, the priestly authors of our biblical text, didn't record but just a handful of observances. And within those, I didn't even get into this, but even within those, we have discrepancies on dates and so forth. We have discrepancies on how to prepare the lamb. And then sometimes we have other discrepancies altogether different than those. So it becomes difficult to imagine that the Passover, today we do Passover Seders, and people think about this is the way it was done all the way back into biblical times. And what I challenge based on my reading of the biblical text is that it wasn't at all kept, at least in the sense that later biblical writers would have us believe. But anyway, we're in the middle of a discussion, and Damon was just getting to Joshua 5 and the Passover there. I went through that in the class this morning. Remember, the only one that's covered in the narrative of the Pentateuch after the original from Exodus 12 is Numbers chapter 9, and it's the second year. Then we have 38 years worth of biblical narrative in which none are described. Doesn't mean they didn't do the Passover. It just seems strange that there is no mention. And then, of course, we get into Joshua, and there are just a very few, and then it's hundreds of years after that before we see the next one. So Damon was just going to comment on Judges, the Passover mentioned in Judges 5. Is that right, Damon?
Yes, Joshua 5. So let me just rewind a little bit for the YouTube audience. Just very briefly, one of the things that I had mentioned previously was that I thought that the night of Passover was actually 24 hours before the night that the Israelites left Egypt. And the reason I brought that up is because I think the Passover was originally based on what we read in Exodus 12, a family-based observance that they kept at home. But the Feast of Unleavened Bread is later described as a pilgrimage festival where they had to go up to observe it. So in Joshua 5, verse 10, we see another instance of the Israelites keeping the Passover, but they're all together. They had just crossed over the Jordan River, and they're keeping the Passover for the first time in the land all together. They hadn't yet spread out across the land or settled it or built homes or anything. The next time, as Ross points out, that we see that is in 2 Chronicles chapter 30 with King Hezekiah. And there is a mention there in that post, as Ross pointed out, that they hadn't kept it that way. Let me see if I can find a Discord here. So let's see, which verse is that?
All right, I've got a stack of hands going up, Damon.
Okay, I'll try to keep this.
Go ahead and make a point. Let's roll through a few of these, and you can always come back, especially since you've written it on Discord. So,
yes. So 2 Chronicles 30, verse 26, it says, "There'd been nothing like this feast in Jerusalem."
Yeah.
Since the time of Solomon. And what's interesting about that is it notes there in the text that they kept this feast for 14 days. And if you go back and look, Solomon kept a feast for 14 days. So, okay, well, maybe it's just talking about a 14-day feast. Maybe. I just want to point that out.
What verse did you just read? I'm sorry. 2 Chronicles 30 and what?
Verse 26. It says there's been nothing like this feast in Jerusalem since the time of Solomon.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So maybe it just was no 14-day feast, since Solomon did actually hold a 14-day feast.
Yeah.
Then, excuse me, we have the Passover of King Josiah, And as you pointed out, he said, such a Passover hadn't been held since the time of the judges, nor in all the days of the kings of Israel and the kings of Judah, which is what it says in 2 Kings 23. And I agree with that, that kind of Passover, number one, it's all together, it's a national Passover. And number two, it's in the first month. They're not keeping it for 14 days, they've just kept it for 7. Could they have been making that distinction? Maybe. I want to point that out as a possibility. But in all of these instances that are recorded, they're all together. They're not keeping it in their homes separately. We have no record of them keeping it in their homes separately. And I think that maybe because they just didn't do a census saying, okay, well, did you keep the Passover this year? I don't think that the Israelites would have recorded that way.
All right. Okay. All right. So I guess your contention is that they probably kept it all along. They just did it in their house.
I'm saying that at least some of the time,
Okay.
maybe not all the time, maybe because they were wicked. For instance, during the time of King Manasseh or King Ahaz, they might not have been keeping it.
Yeah.
But at least some of the time, for instance, during the reigns of David and Solomon, I don't see any reason why they would not have kept it.
Yeah, that's what a lot
But
of biblical
maybe
writers
not all the
say.
time.
We don't know why they wouldn't have, but there's no record of it. So,
Right.
all right. All
Um,
right. Worth putting down, worth considering.
Yep.
Stick around.
Um,
There's probably going to be some more. I want to run down the list, let a few of these other people jump in, and you're always welcome to jump back up.
Sure.
All right, brother. And Julia B. How are you, Julia?
Good morning. Shabbat Shalom, the congregation of the Most High.
Yes, indeed. How are you?
I'm fine. I had this same question when I was reading it, but listening to Damon,
Yep.
and thinking about what I read, I saw a totally different thing.
All right.
I understand what he's saying because when you mention days, usually it's an evening and a morning.
Mm-hmm.
When I read it, the fact that that it specifically says the 14th day at twilight
Okay.
is making a distinction that you are supposed to do it on the 14th day that evening, which is the start of the 15th day. That is it. That is exactly what they did, and they did then leave right after. And when he says that they would not do it in the middle of the night and say, get out, they would wait till the morning. If all your people had died, you can rush them out the door as soon as. You don't have to wait for the morning. You don't have to go, hey, it's the middle of the night. I'm going to wait for the morning. Their people are dying everywhere, and it
Yeah.
is across Egypt that the reason is because they won't let them go. It is indeed a possibility that in the middle of the night they were like, yep, get it, get
Mm-hmm.
the stuff and go. That is why they did the Passover on the twilight of the 14th day, which is the start of the 15th day, and then got up and left. Feast of Unleavened Bread. That is exactly why it is. That is exactly why it is in haste. That's what I read when I read it because it specifically points out the 14th day, the twilight.
Yeah.
Because if it just says the 14th day, it doesn't need to point that out because everyone knows that the 14th day starts on the 13th. The evening of the 13th day, because it is pointed out and says the 14th day at twilight. I think that distinction is being made because what it's saying is the 14th day at twilight, which is the start of the 15th day. Because the distinction is made, because those words are said, to me it points out that it is indeed that it is the twilight of the 14th day, which is also, in fact, the start of the 15th day. That's what it says to me because it points it out.
Yeah.
Usually it doesn't point it out
Mm-hmm.
because it's a known thing that the day is the evening, then the morning. If you're pointing it out, you're doing it for a reason. And that's what I saw. I also want to speak on the fact that he says that the Passover was a indoor family thing, and then the Feast of Unleavened Bread is a thing where they get together. Of course, the first Passover was a indoor thing because the very reason for the Passover is to put the blood on the doors of the lintel and stay inside
Mm.
so that he passes over, that he halts and does not kill them. You couldn't be outside if the reason for the Passover was to stay inside, put the blood on your door, and be protected from the angel of death. The next one they had in the wilderness was all together. The one that Joshua had when they were going in the land was all together. So it is not impossible to think that it is an altogether one, just like the Feast of Unleavened Bread. Because the only reason for the original one being in your house was the very purpose of the Passover,
Mm.
which was stay at your door, put the blood there, we pass over, and take out the firstborn of the Egyptians. That's all.
I'm listening. I'm listening.
That's all I had.
I tell you, it's interesting though, that any discussion on the calendar, we can get into all sorts of fun, can't
Yeah.
we?
Yeah. Because I thought of it. It was just so weird because I actually put in my notes when I was reading. Okay, when we talk about the 14th, is that the start of the 13th day? Is it? And I was wondering that. But when I was listening to Damon and the reasons why, and I was like, well, if you were rushing, that would be it. So that's all.
Now,
That's the way I saw it when
all
I
right,
read it.
all
That's
right.
all.
Now, do you think? I tell you though, I maybe, and I want to get people's input on this. When you look at the biblical narratives from the time we meet with Exodus and the time that we meet with Pesach in Exodus 12, all the way through the biblical narratives, do you think that there was a widespread observance that might just not have been mentioned, or do you think that that's what is suggested, or what? Just a personal opinion based on your reading?
Personally, I don't think it was because I think that one of the things that is important because we have these writings
Yeah.
is so that we would know. And I think that even if some were keeping it, somehow it would have said it. I think I mean not worldwide, the majority were not keeping it, not even in their home.
Yeah.
I think it was not being kept. That's all.
I hear you. Hey, good
Okay.
stuff. I appreciate you.
All right.
Hang around. You might have some more good input. Don't run off.
Okay. Okay.
Todd and Angel, how are you?
Shabbat shalom. We're
Shabbat
good.
shalom. How's it going?
Good.
going.
Good. What are your
There
thoughts today?
There was something that caught my attention when I read through the Torah portion, and it's chapter 12, verse 39 on page 72 of the Exodus Torah tablet.
Yep.
And they baked unleavened cakes of the dough which they brought forth out of Egypt, for it was not leavened, because they were thrust out of Egypt and could not tarry, neither had they prepared for themselves any victuals.
Mm-hmm.
So that makes it seem like they were rushed, and that's why they weren't able to, they didn't have any notice that that's why they were rushed out of Egypt and they weren't able to leaven their breads. But in chapter 12, verse 2, it says, Jehovah spoken to Moses and Aaron in the land of Egypt, saying, this month shall be unto you the beginning of months. It shall be the first month of the year to you. Speak ye unto all the congregation of Israel, saying, in the 10th day of this month they shall take every man. So they knew, I mean, the Passover was coming. They knew the Passover was coming for at least 4 days, if not 14 days.
Mm-hmm.
So why didn't they have time to leaven their bread?
Yeah. Interesting. Mm-hmm. Now, let me ask you this. It's strange the way 12 presents the laws around the Passover sort of in the narrative. So like you get the narrative is flowing, and then chapter 12, some have proposed that portion, is placed in later. It's a later developed, here's the thing about the Passover and how you should do it and so forth. But and so there are indications in the text that make you go, wait a minute, Is that really what's going on here? Is it historical, or is it something that's inserted into the text later? What you're finding here is maybe evidence of that. Is that right? Is that what you're thinking?
Yes, that's what I'm thinking.
Yeah.
It is labeled as being a priestly writing,
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
where everything else is Elohim
Yeah.
except for that.
Yeah.
Kind of like the middle of Deuteronomy, where the log code all of a sudden shows up.
Yeah. Yeah, it is. It is interesting. I was just looking back through at the sources, at least the way the scholars identify the sources. But even if you don't look at the sources, sometimes we read something that really strikes us. Like, let's see, and it's not always. You have to look at the Hebrew behind it. But in chapter 12, verse 17, for instance. And ye shall observe the feast of unleavened bread, for in this selfsame day have I brought your host out of the land of Egypt. Therefore shall ye observe this day throughout your generations by an ordinance forever. In my note, I put have brought or will bring, which is kind of similar to what you're saying. It's like, it sounds like it's reporting on something that's already taken place.
Great.
I don't know.
I didn't catch that, but yeah, you're right.
Yeah, it's now you go, well, I'm not sure that the Hebrew reflects that. It's pretty close. Yeah, it's kind of like, what are we really saying here? Because some parts of this feel like part of the narrative flow, and some of it feel like later legislation that's, inserted in. There's no doubt that the ideas around the Passover developed to what they are now. The question is, what was that? Because we do have texts that are different. So, for instance, we have Exodus 12. If you look at Deuteronomy 16 side by side, we see some differences. One of the things that I point out quite often is Exodus 12 is very clear. You are to roast the Passover in fire. Roast it in fire. Don't boil it, is the way the English puts it. Bashal. And then that's Exodus 12. You go to Deuteronomy 16 and it says bashal it. You are to cook it. How do you cook it? Bashal. Now some say, well, that doesn't necessarily mean boil there. It can mean cook. Whatever it means. It doesn't matter because Exodus 12 said don't do that to it. So there's discrepancies between the two. And that's one of the main things about these texts is we have some complications between the narrative text. All right.
So it's interesting you brought up that part right there, because I was going to mention a couple of things here.
Do it.
It says, but roast with fire its head with its legs and with the inwards thereof. And the comment she made to me earlier was like, that means poop.
The entrails.
She's like, have you ever smelled internal cooking? I'm like, I can't say I have because it smells like poop.
I can imagine it would be in Louisiana. That kind of cooking goes on all the time, though. So, it's probably put a little spice in it.
But now here's another part, too, though, as far as in the text. Then it says, and you shall let none of it remain until the morning, but that which remaineth of it until the morning you shall burn with fire.
What verse?
How are they going to do that if they're already gone?
What verse is that? Say that.
That's verse 10. That's the next verse after that.
Okay.
But whatever remains in the morning, burn it with fire. Well, they're already heading out of town by then.
Mm-hmm.
So why would he give them that commandment? Actually, I'm just going by what the text says.
Yeah.
Somebody needs to have these priests get their stories a little straighter.
Well, it is interesting to look at the narrative very closely. I think that's the goal of what we're trying to do here is to look at it very closely, to be honest with the text. And it's really not. And I know you guys, having been friends for a little while in these conversations, some might be new with us, but the goal is to really have these candid discussions, that a lot of people might get nervous and say, oh, what are we doing here? Well, what we're doing here is trying to make sure that we understand it properly. And different people have different views of these texts. And that's why, we try to let the different views come forward and we discuss it. So I tell you, Exodus 12 is if Exodus 12 is historical, one of my main questions is, why is it that we don't see very much of Exodus 12 reflected in these other stories? Now, I have no doubt that at some point, the way that it's described in Exodus 12 is what the writer intends for us to believe. But at the same time, there are texts like I just read where it seems like it's anachronistic. It's written into an earlier text, as if it's flowing a certain way, but I don't know that it always fits right. Sometimes we get telltale signs that this is written after the events described.
And then you have the Moses scroll that doesn't have any of the festivals in it at all.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, and some people would say, well, I mean, what does that really mean? Well, I tell you, it's certainly, if even without the Moses scroll, what we see is that the festivals, the festival calendar is ripe with divergence from one text to the other. And that's why so many people in Hebrew roots, or, there are all these fights around the festivals, is because, people debate over when the day starts in the Bible, right? So if we can't even get that straight, is it evening to morning? Well, it depends. If you read the priestly sources, and it was evening and it was morning the first day, and people say, well, look here. Well, I think some of you watched the show with Jono and with me, and we're talking through the text, and he pointed out a text the other night, and he said, look, this is one of the texts that's used to argue whether the day begins the night before, So there are differences in that. There are differences in the Passover. There are debates with all of these texts, so it's quite interesting. And what I find striking about the Moses scroll is that it before I knew about Shapira, before I knew about the Moses scroll, I was looking at the text of the Hebrew Bible and analyzing all of these things already and noticing these discrepancies between one text and the other. And I basically said, if you could go back and find what Moses wrote, what would that look like? And that's how it kind of evolved. And surprisingly, a lot of the priestly material is clearly anachronistic. What they did not know in the 1800s is that fact. And so the fact that the Moses scroll is lacking all of that is quite startling to many people. And more people, by the way, are looking at that going, hey, that's kind of interesting.
Well, like we've talked about before, as far as sacrifices go, again, it's a priestly writing. Now, Elohim does back it up later, mentioning Passover, but it doesn't. That's it. It just mentions Passover. You'll kill the Passover. That's all it says.
Yeah.
It gives you no information whatsoever about it except for in the priestly writing. And I kind of think of, like what you and Jono were talking about, if there were 2 or 3 million of these people, that's a lot of lambs.
Yeah.
So is there going to be a resurrection of the lambs like there is the cattle?
I'll tell you what, that is a lot of lambs. And if you read like 2 Chronicles 30, there's a lot of lambs described, but it's not, it's not even enough. But the question could be, would they be able to even kill that many? I mean, if they tried. I mean, and especially if the killing of the lamb needed to take place at a certain time. Could you man that many knives? Or the question then becomes, well, that's happening in homes all across the land, and the temple is only doing a certain, for the show of it, I guess. But either way, I mean, the difficulties in the text are quite enormous when you really look at it.
Not only that, but if you really think about it, so they slaughtered the lambs and had the Passover. And by the time they get in the desert, they're complaining to Moses about starving.
Yeah.
But they had cattle and lambs, and if that happened, they would have gotten a taste for the lamb, and they wouldn't be any lambs left if they're out there in the wilderness starving to death.
Yeah. Look, I just saw a comment that backs like what I was just saying about when I was looking at the text. Betty Elisheva asked, did I not present that at one of our conferences in the presentation you entitled The Hand of Moses? I did. It was Finding the Hand of Moses, the Torah within our Torah. That's kind of what got me started into all this. It was in 2019, I believe. And then that was in April, and it was in December of 2019 when Tabor sent me an article on about Tegay's book, Hanan Tegay's book on the missing scroll of Moses or whatever. So to answer another question, yes, the strips are missing. But what is interesting, and we are deeply engaged in the quest for those strips, and it's not impossible that we're going to find them. I really feel confident that we are, and there are reasons why I believe that. But here's the thing. What we do have is we have independent of each other, we have transcriptions of the Hebrew of that manuscript. And that's what makes it even more believable. It's not like, somebody said like the angel Moroni gave me some tablets and, whatever. This is not like a Mormon deal. This is he says, here are the scrolls that I have, and experts of the day looked at them and they wrote down everything that was on the scrolls in front of them. And so, but people just didn't believe it because they said, wait a minute, you're telling me that they discovered this in a cave? There's no way an ancient scroll could survive in a cave by the Dead Sea for this long. It's just preposterous. And yet, in the winter of 46, 47, scrolls were discovered, and they look a whole lot like what's described in our accounts. So, yes, indeed. Hey, this is fun stuff, though. I enjoy this. What else did you see, Angel or Todd, when you were working through this class today?
I think I saw some of the stuff that you and Jenna spoke about, but I don't want to repeat that.
Well, that's okay. Hang around. If this gets boring and dry, you got to jump back up and bring some of those things, because I have in my Exodus tablet, what's handy about this is I used to make long lists when I was working on preparing for the thing with Jono. But now I just work through the text and jot notes. And as we work through, I just look down and, bring it up as we're talking about it. It's really a handy deal.
Yes, it is.
Yeah.
All right. Okay, good stuff. Well, hang around. Maybe you'll have some more comments in a little bit.
All right.
All right.
Appreciate you. And James Brumgard, how are you, brother?
I'm doing fine. Can you hear me okay?
I hear you perfectly well. How are you? What are your thoughts today?
What Damon was talking about brought back some memories. I know you're aware. I don't know how many other people are aware, but I have a Worldwide Church of God background. And for many years, worldwide, and I think that's up until they basically kind of threw out the Bible, as those of us that left worldwide, they took what Damon was talking about, that distinction between the two evenings, and they felt that there was a separation of like the evening between the 13th and the 14th was what they were looking at as the time for the slaughtering of the lambs. And then they incorporated the, quote, New Testament Passover with the foot washing service into that evening. And then there was a day, obviously the daylight portion of the 14th was the day you prepared your house to unleaven it and all that. And then there would be what they called a night to be much observed dinner in your home, similar to the current Jewish Passover, where people are have a Seder in their own homes.
Yep.
And then on that first, on the 15th, there would be a church service. Mm-hmm. That was the first holy day of that time frame. So I just wanted to share that what Damon was talking about. He's not the first to see that distinction. Worldwide did that as well. So.
Yeah, I was, to your point, that was my initial thought as well. And there are a lot of debates, and some of these, though not all, are tied with trying to create a workable chronology, even down to how many days in the tomb. I mean, a lot of that stuff even gets tacked in. What day was it that this happened and that happened? And but I have come across that. Yeah, you and many others who've been at least made a stop through Worldwide Church of God. You've spent a good deal looking at the difficulties in the calendar, I bet.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Very much so.
And there's some really good points, by the way, in that. It's not like people who have come through that world didn't spend countless hours looking at these different texts trying to figure this out. My hat's off. I mean,
Yep. There's a lot of side discussions about, well, what complication are we getting if we go this direction or that direction, how you interpret everything. So there was always that bit on the side.
yeah,
The other point I wanted to mention was it talks about the instructions in Exodus about how to observe the Passover, about being your feet shod and you're like getting ready to to bug out.
yeah,
And so that it wasn't like a surprise, like you weren't going to go anywhere. He told you to be prepared to go. So that part I like, but I do understand what Todd and Angel were talking about. If you just have to kill it, burn what's left over in the morning, you're obviously not leaving in the night if you're doing it
yeah.
as that is instructed. So again, there's still some complications there.
Oh yeah, yeah, and it's like you pick your complications, and so what happens is is once we decide how we want it to work, we typically will pull the verses which support that position. Now, believe me, I know that that's neater, and a lot of people like that. A lot of people just say, you're bringing up these discrepant verses. Let's say that there are discrepant. Which one do I go with? This is what people really want to know. And for me, it's not quite that simple. I want to continue to work through and identify who's saying this and why would they say it. So let me ask you, James, mainly because I've known you for a long time and I know you've studied this kind of thing. If I bring up, for instance, and you can pass on this question, but I'm interested in your take. When we look at the Passover in the time of Josiah, 2 Kings 23 and 2 Chronicles 35, and it says that there's not been one, since, let me go to it so I don't phrase it the wrong way. I want to make sure I ask this the correct way. Let's see. Hold on 1 second. 252. Okay. In Chronicles, it says, no Passover like it had been kept in Israel since the days of Samuel the prophet. None of the kings of Israel had kept such a Passover as was kept by Josiah. Notice it says kings of Israel. If I look at kings, it says since the days of the judges who judge Israel, or during all the kings of Israel or of the kings of Judah. Now, I explain in my class today that Kings mentions none of the kings of Israel or Judah, and Chronicles mentions none of the kings of Israel. Do you agree or disagree that might suggest that Chronicles can't say kings of Judah didn't keep it because they just reported that Hezekiah kept it? Does that make sense?
It does. It has.
You don't have to agree with it, but
no. What I was thinking is, when were those books written? In the sense that, are they citing passages that may have been written before Josiah ever kept it? That was one thing that came to mind.
Yeah.
That so it may have been a fact at the time that the words were put down on whatever scroll it was. But
fair enough. Yeah.
so that was my one thought. The other thing I wanted to comment, well, two things.
Yeah.
What Damon was talking about is being Passover as a festival to be kept in your homes. There's not a lot of reason for it to be written up as something that was a big event. Whereas what Josiah did, it became a temple service versus in your home type service. So there is certainly a possibility that others may have been keeping it all along within their own family's tradition, and just like the Jews hiding out from the Nazis, they're trying to keep their festivals, but they certainly kept it quiet.
Yeah.
That kind of thing. So, that was one thought on that, is that, yeah, there might be a reason for it not to be observed. And if you look at it, was Passover ever intended to be kept at the temple? That's a question that comes to mind.
Yeah, and was there ever supposed to be a temple, which is another question.
Yeah,
but I shall not
I'm on
go
that
there
boat
right
too,
now.
so, yeah. All right.
Hey, good
That's it for
stuff.
now.
Good stuff.
Okay.
Stick around in case you have some other stuff to stir the pot with, James. I appreciate you.
I will. Thanks.
All right, brother. Hello, Clody. How are you?
Hi. Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom. How's it going?
Perfectly.
Good.
Yeah, this
What-
was one of the perfect Shabbats.
I hear you. I love Shabbat. What are some of your good comments for us today? What are you thinking?
So I'm gonna begin from what Brother James was saying.
Okay.
What was the reason that it was not kept? That is the question of the whole class, I think, today. Which is the reason that Pesach was not kept as it was commanded? Now let's keep that in mind, and I really would like to read from this book.
Hey, that's a pretty good book. I'm all right with that.
The seventh commandment.
Okay.
And the seventh commandment says, "You shall not swear by my name to deceive, because I am passionate," and people may continue to read it. But it says, "You shall not swear by my name to deceive." That's very crucial.
Yeah.
And I think that posing or selling or saying that some words are the original words of God while they are not, to me, it feels like that is disobeying this commandment. And it's very crucial.
Yeah.
Now, I understand that we come in this path and we are all together because we are trying to meticulously study and analyze and understand even the slightest and the smallest details. However, we should not lose the path. We should not lose the direction or the aim or our original scope.
Mm-hmm.
So I understand that there are differences when does the day begins,
Yeah.
in the morning or in the evening. I understand that there are differences of opinions as to was Pesach kept or not, inside or outside the house, publicly or privately, in people's places. However, the point is not that here. The point here is that there is no consistency. No consistency in the narratives, no consistency in the ways of cooking the lambs. And if you add other facts and arguments from the Tanakh, and one of those is circumcision, you understand that many of these biblical feasts were not kept properly.
Mm-hmm.
Now, why? Let's go back to the question. Why? They were supposed to be God's people, and they did have God's commandments, and they did have some righteous kings or or prophets or judges
Yep.
throughout the time. But we see that they were not consistent in keeping these other laws, which I would suggest, from my point of view, calling them lesser laws, because the Ten Commandments are an altogether different theme. So I think that those are the biggest commandments, and then we have the other rules and regulations. So why weren't they keeping it? And one of the reasons that logically comes to mind is that perhaps this was not written, these rules and regulations were not written with the Moses scroll that was put beside the original small ark of Moses with the Ten Commandments,
Amen.
with the two Torah tablets.
Mm-hmm.
So perhaps I think that is one of the main reasons that we should analyze and stick on it. And I want to read something from Matthew.
Okay.
It's on chapter 13, and I would suggest everybody read it again, all the chapter, or at least from 24 to 48.
Wait, give me
However,
the verse.
want-
I'm sorry. Let me make sure, because I have my handy Bible here. Matthew 13.
Yeah.
Okay.
Can you read us 24 to 30?
I can, but I like your voice better. Matthew 13.
I've got an accent. Okay,
I like
I
your.
will
Go
read.
ahead. Go ahead.
So I'm reading it from the KJV.
Okay.
KJV.
Right.
So it says, another parable put he, meaning Jesus, forth unto them, saying, the kingdom of heaven, and that is something that we should see what kingdom of heaven means. It might be the kingdom of heaven, but it might be the law of God. It might be even that. Vasilia ton uranon in Greek, in Septuagint, means the kingdom of the sky.
Okay.
Or the rule that comes from the sky. But let's read it as it is. The kingdom of heaven is likened unto a man which sowed good seed in his field. But while man slept, his enemy came and sowed tares among the wheat, and went his way. But when the blade was sprung up and brought forth fruit, then appeared the tares also. So the servants of the householder came and said unto him, Sir, didst not thou sow good seed in thy field? From whence then hath it tares? He said unto them, An enemy hath done this. An enemy hath done this.
Mm-hmm.
The servants said unto him, Wilt thou then that we go and gather them up? But he said, Nay, lest while ye gather up the tares, ye root up also the wheat with them. Let both grow together until the harvest, and in the time of harvest I will say to the reapers, Gather ye together first the tares, and bind them in bundles to burn them, but gather the wheat into my barn. I know the original interpretation of this, that is something that at least Christianity uses that for good people, sheep of God, versus bad people, goats. But I think that this also, you as you have suggested many times, this is something that has happened with the Word of God.
Yes.
So what we are doing now is trying to, because it is the time of the harvesting, or at least we are going really close to it, because people are not listening to whatever the priests say or every other preacher says. people really want to understand by themselves. So we are living in a very glorious epoch because people really want to use their own brains.
Yep.
So I think that that's what we are doing, and that is the important. I understand the details, I understand the small differences, but I think that there are more things that unite us to find, and that is the scope of finding the real seeds, the good seeds, and to throw away the tares. This was my
Well,
comment.
I didn't
Dave.
want to interrupt. I was holding back, like shouting amen and hallelujah all through that. And let me just say, you know, it's funny, in our journeys, we've all come a long way to where we are. And some would think we were off with this, but I don't think that at all. Years and years ago, I came across the writings of the church fathers, and they described a group, and I know Todd and Angel are especially familiar with this. Others may be as well, so I just happen to know they are. With the writings, that we define this group as the Ebionim, the Ebionites. And the Ebionites, one of the things that we know about them from history. Now remember, they're described by their enemies. Like their enemies destroyed all of their works. And so all we have left is our biblical writings, which I think have been corrupted in ways, and we have the writings of the church fathers who hated them and beat them until only, as we say, the victors write the history. Well, the Ebionites believed, based on text like this, for the lying pen of the scribes has made the Torah into a lie. Now, look, a fundamentalist, an apologist, someone who believes that the Bible is the truth, the whole truth, nothing but the truth, they hate that verse, and they describe it as meaning something else. And look, I did that too. I thought for years, I said, well, it can't mean that. It can't mean that the Torah has things in it that are created by a lying pen, because the Torah is the truth, the whole truth, nothing but. So I had that battle raging in my mind. But the Ebionites, one of the things that they said that the Bible contained true and false coins. And you had to distinguish between true and false. And they used other examples like this. And how do you know the difference? And they said one of the things is the sacrifices. They said this is an interpolation, that God never wanted sacrifices. And what happens is, when I bring that up, people go, oh, you haven't read this? Did you not know this? Did you not? Like, I haven't read the whole story. Yes, I've read those texts, I promise you. Man, I'm saying, you've not read this, and you've not read it. And they're like, well, I've read the whole thing too. But people decide that they're going to defend a certain aspect of the text, and I believe that they believe they're doing the right thing.
They are deceived.
They are deceived. See, there, you're harder than I am. I was trying to be nice, but you're right.
From people that swear by God's name to deceive.
That's
they
right.
are deceived from these people, people that are disobeying one of the most important commandments of the 10 words.
And what if we find ourselves defending something that clearly is not original to God? So, for instance, let's think about the sacrifice. Does God want, need, require? Does he desire? You know, Hosea 6:6 is very, very clear. This is God speaking, according to this text. I desire chesed, true loyalty, loving kindness, veloz. There are a desire for sacrifice, others say not. There are a desire for sacrifice, others say not. Listen, this is the thing that gets me about today's class that I want to really kind of shift into, if we can, a little bit. Some of you may want to talk about this. Clody, you'll be the first one. But Jeremiah 7, where it says, on the day that I brought them out of the land of Egypt, I didn't command them concerning sacrifices and burnt offerings. Now, some people might say, yeah, but the Passover is not a sacrifice. Well, I'm saying use the Hebrew phrase, zavak. Did God or did God not, when he brought them out? And so then you have this tension in the text, and you're saying, well, maybe I don't see how both can be right. So what people then do is they either say, well, that's not accurate, or they say, I'm not sure I understand. We're maybe misinterpreting Jeremiah, but there are texts. And then Amos 5:25, did I command you those 40 years in the wilderness sacrifices? Well, if you read the Pentateuch, they're killing all kind of animals. They're sacrificing all over the place. So the question is, are you, Clody, being too hard on the text? Am I being too hard on the text by saying, look, I have this tension in the text. What if I'm actually defending that original text before it was corrupted by the lying pen of the scribes? That's the question. It comes down to that.
It's simpler than we think.
Yeah.
It's simpler, and Jesus did say that you will understand from the fruits. So there are many witnesses. We can understand from the witnesses.
I have a couple of friends that just recently joined a big debate on the internet, interviewing James Tabor, and he wanted to interview me. JJ said he met him at the conference. He did. You did. That's the guy. He was at the conference last year. And he wanted to interview us about whether or not sacrifices were the original ideal in the biblical text. And again, like us, he knows that there are plenty of text about sacrifices, but is it authentic? Is it original? Is it from God? And he and a partner of his were debating, two guys, on the subject of, it's like 5 hours of debate. Just came out. In fact, this morning while I was teaching, I think part 2 was released. But Cameron Waters has become a very big believer in the message of the Moses scroll, because here we've got a text which, by all apparent measures, comparing text to text, it seems to be closer to what would be the authentic message based on what we understand now. And he loves it because it doesn't have the sacrificial cult in it. And so I have to believe that if a person doesn't know about the Moses scroll, it's one thing. But if you read the biblical text, you have to get the point that God did not have sacrifices in the beginning. There will not be sacrifices in the end. And that should make us wonder, well, why are they in the middle?
And there is also, I'm sorry to interrupt you.
No, go ahead.
The verse that says that the Torah of God is not on the sky, or is not
Deuteronomy 30.
It's not difficult. But if we see all these lesser rules and regulations, it becomes hard.
Yeah.
And harder to keep it. So we should really aim to discover within the scriptures which is the simple original word of God.
And I know that some people aren't as comfortable with this quest. For me, and I get that. For me, it's the most important thing I could spend my time on. There's nothing more important than, I mean, look,
Amen.
I love the Hebrew Bible. even in the state that it is in now. And I love the quest and the seeking. And I think that we have to be willing to persevere, to look at the difficulties and say, if I have two different opinions, could it be that we can make a decision clearly based on the text and come away with the right answer? And I think that's true. You know, I remember years ago when I was beginning to question some things, and I thought about the story of Elijah and the prophets of Baal. You know, in that story, he says, if my God is, if I'm right here, let this happen, and it happened. Well, you can't do that. You know, that's not going to happen. So we have to, it is sort of an intellectual exercise in some ways, but I don't want people to lose that element of faith. Like, I really believe that God gave a message and that message is discernible. It's almost like those who truly seek are going to find. I really believe that. I don't think it's impossible. I think it's actually very possible. And I think it's the one thing we should spend our time and energy on.
You will seek and you will find me because you are going to seek me with all of your heart. I think it's the verse.
That's right. That's right.
Okay. Thank you.
Hey, good stuff. So it is Shabbat Shalom, my friend. It is 12:58. So I'm about to bring Karen up. You don't want to miss this, but here's the deal. If you're part of the Yachad, come on over. Please join us in the Zoom call. If you're not yet a part of the Yachad, please join us, and you'll be able to join us in these cool calls. We're going to keep going, and we're going to keep jumping into this very interesting topic here. And Karen, I am going to say goodbye to everyone on YouTube land. Goodbye, Shabbat Shalom. See you Thursday night, and join the Yachad and come join us here. Shabbat Shalom.